Thanks for joining us for The Drive Back, the movie podcast where, of course, we imitate our favorite thing to do after a movie, which is to talk about it on the ride home. I'm Garrett, and as always, I'm joined by my good friend and co-host, Adrian.
I'm somehow still here.
Which is good. We didn't lose you in all that street racing we're about to do. But today, we've got a special episode. Franchise Fever is back. It's back, and it is ready to drive. Because we're doing a big one. But Adrian, what is a Franchise Fever?
Oh, a franchise fever is where we review a series of movies that has 3 or more installments of it. Think Indiana Jones, Pirates of the Caribbean, Fast and the Furious, one might say. Quite a bit of those. But that's the requirement for it. We basically just go through and then we kind of stack them all up as we go on which ones we liked, which ones we didn't. Then we tier them all together and you kind of find out the order in terms of best to worst.
That's absolutely right. And today, we've got a big one. This is one we've been talking about for a year now since we started the podcast, and we've been really looking forward to getting it done. And that's the Fast and the Furious franchise, which is coming out just in time to watch the 9th one later this week when this comes out. So all this and more coming up on The Drive Back. All right, so Fast and Furious, a franchise that I had not seen a single movie in.
Somehow.
I mean, it just never peaked the top of my list. But we're doing it here today. This franchise is giant now with 9 films. The 10th coming out. Well, Fast 9 coming out on later this week. But there are now 10 films in the franchise, including Hobbs and Shaw, which is on this list. We did watch all of the Fast and Furious movies. So. Yep. Saying that, we've got 9 movies to get through. We should probably get the ball rolling. So the first
lots of them, crazy.
First movie is The Fast and the Furious, directed by Rob Cohen and released in 2001. It stars Vin Diesel, Paul Walker, and Michelle Rodriguez. Los Angeles police officer Brian O'Connor must decide where his loyalty really lies when he becomes enamored with the street racing world he has been sent undercover to destroy. So, first in the franchise. This was the starting point, and man, this started.
What did you think? Yeah, you hadn't seen them. I'll let everyone know. I have a very special place in my heart for these movies. I own all of them. I own the first one twice for some reason. I'm not sure how that happened. But I like most of these just in general. I think they're very fun. So I really want to get your take on it and find out what you thought as a first-time viewer.
So there are things I'm going to say about all these movies that will be echoed across 9 of these films. It was a lot of fun, and it kept my interest, but that's about it.
What else? What more can you ask for?
I mean, dialogue that doesn't sound like it was written by a 5-year-old. A horrible music and title sequence that, I think I was watching this near someone, and I was visibly going like cringing at it. And they were like, are you okay? And I was like, it's the title sequence for Fast and Furious 1. And they were like, oh, I'm sorry. But, I mean, the at the end of the day, the movie kept my interest for the whole runtime. I didn't look away. So...
That's great.
It starts off on a positive note. So
it also starts off very differently, I would say, from the rest of the franchise in terms of out of 9 films about to be 10, I would say this is one of 3 that actually has street racing in it.
Yes.
They actually race cars in a line.
For more than 5 minutes.
Yeah, this one is about street racing, which is really fun. I think it was a really great idea, and I think it still holds up as a street racing film.
I mean, it's incredibly dated now, because I don't believe the street racing scene is anywhere near as prevalent as it was during the time of this movie. But I mean, man, it's also
interesting.
It's also the only one of the movies that I would say that feels dated.
Tuna sandwiches are completely illegal now.
I know. Since the great tuna epidemic of 2021, we have no tuna anymore. No, I'm kidding. Every comment I have is for every single movie in this franchise. And I really need to talk about the writing because it is so bad. And yet this person is making millions of dollars for writing these movies, and it bugs me to my core.
Well, I think you talked about it at the beginning of this. We have an episode about this, that does fun matter in a movie? Mm-hmm. And I think that this series, to me, is the epitome of that, because everybody knows that they are just trashy movies. That they have a huge budget and they go all out on the action sequences, and they say family 5 million times per movie. But yet everybody still goes to see it because it's just so dang fun. And we don't get movies this fun really anymore.
It's rare that you get movies that are this fun. I would say like Godzilla vs. Kong or Ready Player One are like closest to what we get for this level of fun. Maybe Mission Impossible too, but Mission Impossible's like I haven't seen a lot of them, but I know that they're a little bit deeper than just fun.
Yeah, I would say they take themselves much more seriously. I think Fast and Furious as a franchise, before we talk more about the first one, knows what it is.
Yeah, I mean, I would say this franchise doesn't take itself seriously starting around the 4th movie. The first 3 do take themselves seriously, and it is... I mean, at least the first one and the 3rd one do, and it doesn't work. Like,
fascinating.
I mean, again, it's just like, there's... these movies are baffling to me, because, like, they're a lot of fun, and they're fun to watch. But then at the end of it, I'm like, I just watched like that, and like again, I just have no words for a lot of these.
Well, did you like it?
The first one, I would say, if it's a scale of like really hate to really love, and then like,
what if it was on a scale of 1 to 100?
Well, we'll get to that at the end of the review. But I would say overall, this one, I don't like it as much as I like others in this franchise.
Sure,
like,
that's totally fair.
If this had been released today, it would be a straight-to-DVD film, and it would not have been successful, and it wouldn't have got a sequel. And honestly, after watching the first movie, I'm amazed that it got a sequel, because it just feels that poorly written, that poorly just executed, that it just doesn't feel like it warranted Too Fast, Too Furious after that.
I'm surprised you're surprised when we have Sharknado 7.
That's also true. I
think
retract my
people...
statement.
I think people, especially with this first one, being so... I mean, you could argue, if not like a foot in the door, a revolutionary film for racing movies. I think that people... Like, it immediately gathered that cult following of, like, tuner street racers. There was finally a movie that at least was, like, somewhat representative of your culture. And I mean, there's so many scenes that are iconic. I want to talk about what your favorite part is, but I mean, the 3 cars robbing the truck is iconic. Racing underneath the semi-truck, and I mean, there's so many things, but I want to get, what was your, like, I guess, takeaway scene? We'll go through it for each one. What was your favorite part?
My favorite part, I would say, it'll probably sound really generic and kind of stereotypical, but I think the final drag race,
Sure.
the final quarter mile, is really key, because it includes an amazing stunt with the Dodge Charger kind of barrel rolling. And I mean, from a storytelling point of view, we all kind of knew that Paul Walker wasn't feeling the cop thing, and he was going to help out his new family anyway. You know, and so he gives him the keys to his car. Here's your 10-second car, kind of a thing. For the story, it works, and I think for that moment of the movie, I mean, just, you know, the actual stunt itself is a big part of it. I have to disagree. I think that the 3-car heist, in retrospect now, feels incredibly underwhelming compared to the other movies in the franchise, because they just look more bigger and bombastic. So it kind of falls under the radar, for me at least.
Huh. Well, in the order that you watched them, I mean, it was the first, and to me, every time I drive by a semi-truck, I imagine driving underneath it. I think that is... Okay, here's actually what I'll say. The stunts got bigger, but that's still possible. Cars drive... Like, you can have a car low enough to perform that stunt in real life, and I think that's what makes it stand out so much, is it was like a crazy thing that is real.
I think that maybe that's the issue of me watching them all in order, having them already accessed, because it's the baseline, right? That's what you build off of. And See, no one really ever really remembers the baseline unless it's something truly iconic, and it just wasn't for me.
Yeah, and
but
maybe
Drag
that
Race
is
is my favorite.
maybe that does come from watching them all back to back, because I think anyone that saw them in theater in order would say that's an iconic scene.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
But yeah, that drag race scene is great. I mean, just that's probably the most iconic part of the entire franchise. Still, is that original drag race.
Well, I mean, it's still referenced in a lot of stunt people's videos and things like that, and how that barrel roll was set up and executed is just flawless.
Yeah, it's there's so many behind the scenes analysis of that scene. It's crazy.
Yeah, absolutely. But anything else you want to kind of talk about the first one before we move on to the second one? We got 9 films to get through. So.
Yeah, no, I do think while it might be the most dated one just by camera technology, I think even the next one really steps it up a notch, just by just technology evolving. But this first one does feel a little dated. There are, however, so many iconic moments and catchphrases and quotes that people still reference to this day, especially if you saw it in theaters back then. So I think this one does get a little bit more points for me in terms of just the icon status of it. But yeah, I'm ready to give a score, but I really want to know what you think. I really, really want to know.
Sure. So like for all these, I have a final thought, kind of like a rolling like Rotten Tomatoes style little sum up of review and the thing. So for the first one, I said this cringy, schlocky, and emotionless film manages to deliver some good action scenes and enough to keep your attention through its thankfully short runtime. And I gave The Fast and the Furious a 45.
Nice. I gave it a 70.
Alrighty. Any particular reason why?
Kind of the final thoughts I just gave, but I think this is a super fun movie. I mean, it's got its problems. It's nowhere near a perfect film. In fact, I totally get the argument that it's a bad film. But I think this movie changed a generation and inspired a culture. And while they've gotten bigger, better, faster, and stronger in the later films, I think this one is the backbone and the foundation, and you have to give credit where it's due. And I still rewatch this movie. I think it's super fun.
Alrighty. Well, that is going to bring us to an end for the first film in the franchise. The second one is Too Fast, Too Furious. Released in 2003, it was directed by John Singleton and stars Paul Walker, Tyrese Gibson, and Eva Mendes. Former cop Brian O'Connor is called upon to bust a dangerous criminal, and he recruits the help of a former childhood friend and street racer who has a chance to redeem himself. So I'm guessing you want to know what I think of this one.
For all of them, yeah.
Surprisingly, for most of my viewing of this franchise, this was my favorite.
Oh, nice.
For a very interesting reason. This movie is still bad. It's nowhere near as good. It's as good as the later films. Sounds like they're masterpieces. They're not. But this movie for me feels like an unaired, shot pilot of a Miami Vice reboot for TV, and I love it for that reason. If this movie was set during the 80s, it would be a perfect film. I love the idea that this is actually, an 80s movie, like Miami Vice style. They got the old Lamborghinis and stuff, like total 80s retro. I would have loved this film so much more. And actually, thinking about that movie and thinking about the movie in that way made it better for me. And I actually enjoyed the film more.
Okay, fair enough.
Which is interesting because, and it is a tonal shift for the franchise too, right? Like they're dealing with a drug lord. They're dealing not so much with cars, really. There really isn't that much about cars in the movie besides like the auto shop and all that. But like, looking at it as its own film would have been great if it was in the 80s. Looking at it as a Fast and Furious movie, it's still on the weaker side, obviously, because it doesn't deal with cars as much.
Sure. I get
undercoverness. But I mean, it does set a precedent for what the later films will follow in the franchise, so maybe that's a big reason for it. But I mean, I think this movie was a lot more fun than the first one, actually.
Yeah, I think that kind of, I mean, obviously it's literally just turning everything up a notch. And I think there's a lot of fun car moments in this movie, like the ejecto seat, the scene where they drive into the garage and then like 1,000 cars drive out of the garage. which I would do more cars than could possibly fit in that building drive out of that garage, which is just so funny and almost makes it better for me. But yeah, I think the stunts got a little crazier in this one. CGI, I think, was still in its infancy for this type of thing. And you can definitely tell, like, some of the jumping scenes certainly don't hold up. But there's a lot of still very famous lines, like Steve Aoki's sister is in this.
Yeah, Devon Aoki, I think.
Yeah, I forget her first name, which is I shouldn't, but she's like, and then we get Ludacris, obviously, crazy, big afro, awesome. Everyone kind of in this, it really lays the groundwork for what's coming next. The first one was kind of just, if you want to consider it like a street racing movie, this one was like, oh, we're gonna build something, and they start it right here, and it's really fun.
Yeah, I mean, this movie has a level of fun to it that I think was amplified from the first one. I don't want to say the fun was missing from the first one, because it certainly wasn't. It was amplified in this one, and again, I think by keeping it more grounded and telling more of a, a drug cartel running story, but then also infusing that with we're undercover drivers for this drug lord, I think made it stand out a little bit more. Again, it just feels like a Miami Vice episode, and I love it.
It's not a bad thing. Yeah.
No, I'm not saying it's a bad thing at all. But there is that. Also, one thing I forgot to highlight with the first one, and is through the third movie in this franchise, is that this movie was incredibly misogynistic throughout the first three, and really kind of keeping women to a lesser role, just as literal sex symbols. A lot of them walking around in bikinis and dancing at the street races. I mean, all of the movies do that, unfortunately, and you get a little bit less of it as the films go on, but it was very prevalent in the first three, and it's a little distracting. I mean, I guess it was a sign of the times, but just...
Yeah, I think everything, I would say any movies that came out during this time viewed through the lens of 2021 eyeballs would appear that way. And I personally don't fault them for that. Well, yes, if they were made today, they could never, like the one that's going to come out. I doubt if it is as kind of oppressive as this one, or as the initial three. But I don't knock them for that, because it nobody knew. We just have such a woke mentality now, that looking back, of course, like totally everyone in that movie would be canceled. The director would be totally canceled. But I mean, that is a negative, but it's still, if you kind of can put away the 2021 eyeballs, I still think it's super fun.
No, yeah, this movie is still super fun. And anytime we fault an older movie for that kind of a thing, we don't actually take points off.
Yeah.
It just has to be part of the discussion, kind of.
Sure.
It's how we learn and grow, right?
Absolutely.
But I mean, I really don't have much more to say about this movie. It's just more fun than the first one. Also, it has an incredible torture sequence with the heating of the bucket with a rat underneath, and you have it on the guy's chest. That's such a I forgot that was a torture
still
method.
Haunts me to this day.
It's a great way to torture someone. And
I have a severe fear of mice and rats from this movie.
Really?
Yeah,
from this?
So when they're talking about how, like, if the rat gets too hot, it'll find a way out, right? So when I lived in Monterey, my house had a rat in it, or a mouse, and it was during the winter months, and I thought of that scene, and I got so scared because my reverse mentality said, well, if it's so cold and I sleep with my mouth open, it's probably warmer in my mouth than outside, and the mouse is going to crawl into my mouth. But it literally, like, all my fear comes from that scene. Because I don't... Maybe it's just because that scene made me just really not understand rats. So now I'm just afraid of the unknown. I don't know.
There's an actual YouTube video out there where they're like, well, rats actually wouldn't do that. They enjoy the heat. And you're like, no. Too Fast, Too Furious said they'll dig through my chest. But I guess we can go ahead and give some wrap-up thoughts for Too Fast, Too Furious.
Yeah, sure.
I will go ahead and give mine first here again.
Okay.
So what feels like a pilot for a show we never got, or a tribute to the 80s, Too Fast, Too Furious is much more fun than the original, but it's still very cringy as well. But it also does keep itself a little bit more grounded than the first one. It's kind of more of a undercover kind of cop story. So because of that, I gave it a 54. Still more fun, but not as, good as the later ones get.
Sure. I gave this movie a 60. I don't think it's as strong as the first one in terms of knowing what it wants to be. I think this movie definitely took the I guess the key pillars of the first one and turned them up to 11. But I think it lost some of its tonality in that and kind of just became this, I don't know, like a weird conglomeration of films. Was it like a racing movie? Was it a spy movie? Was it a detective movie? Was it a James Bond movie? I mean, it just kind of lost itself to me.
Yeah.
But it's still like, again, it's just a blast. I mean, that's what I'm gonna say for all of these because I just love them and I'm definitely biased in that sense. But they're just a blast. That's all I gotta say. But this one definitely for me worse than the first.
Gotcha. All right, moving on to the third film in the franchise, which is The Fast and the Furious: Tokyo Drift. Released in 2006, it was directed by Justin Lin and stars Lucas Black, Shad Moss, and Zachary Ty Bryan. A teenager becomes a major competitor in the world of drift racing after moving in with his father in Tokyo to avoid a jail sentence in America. I'm just going to go ahead and say it. I mean, we're not doing the tiered from best to worst in this, or from worst to best in this video, because it's just a reflection of the scores, really. But this is the worst in the franchise, hands down. For one very blatant reason, and that is the main actor. He is so emotionless, such a blank slate. Like, I get the idea of you want to put yourself in the shoes of the main character and you want to feel like you're there kind of a thing.
Sure.
But this feels like a negative force, like a repelling force, like, the similar sides of a magnet type thing. Like, I want to latch onto a character, but it's forcing me away. With the worst sounding accent I think I've ever heard. From a character ever. Just my biggest problem with this movie mostly came down to the acting and not providing anything to latch onto. There is some fun racing sequences in this movie, but there's more of these backstory with the Yakuza, and I mean, even the big final race at the end looked very fake. It was all in the dark, probably a lot of CGI. Which is interesting because Justin Lin is the director of this and moves on to direct some of the better films in the franchise.
Yeah.
Which is very weird. I mean, I would say Sung Kang, who plays Han, is really the only highlight in this movie. I mean, Han is probably one of my favorite characters throughout the entire thing.
Sure.
Yeah, this movie just, of all of them, this is the one that I just completely lost interest in 10 minutes ago.
Sure. Yeah, I love this movie. I think this is certainly better than the first two. I think this one has probably some of the most things that I still reference to this day. The Tokyo Drift song is incredible. Little Bow Wow's Hulk truck is incredible. There's like so many things in this, and I definitely totally get what you're saying with the final racing scene with DK, which isn't Donkey Kong, by the way. It's Drift King, if you aren't familiar with the series. But like that whole thing, I get what you're saying. The CGI certainly, again, still in its infancy for this. Like they tried to do as much of it practically as they could, but you can definitely tell when it jumps into CGI. But to me, the weight that the final race carries makes it so fun and crazy. Like there's literally people standing on the side of the road filming this drift race at like, I don't know, let's just say 100 miles an hour. And like the cars are almost hitting them and they're like live streaming it. They're like, whoa, that was close.
Are you talking the Tokyo race where Han has his accident, or are you talking about the actual final race between the Drift King and Sean?
The actual final race where he loses control. Well, spoiler alert. Where DK loses control of the car.
Oh, okay, got you. I thought you were referencing the one where Drift King is chasing Han through the streets. That one is actually good. I like that.
Yeah, that one's good.
But
yeah. Well, I think they're both good. But I think that's just super fun. Yeah, the final scene of Han, or I guess them all drifting through Shibuya Station, which is amazing. 1 million people used to cross it every day. Now that COVID, it's probably different. But that scene of like splitting the crowd is iconic. There's so many things, and this movie in particular laid a lot of groundwork for later films as well.
I mean, story-wise, there's one big thing that stands out with it that kind of, it looks like it's getting retconned in the next one. But again, like with this one, the fun is outweighed by just the horrid acting, at least from my point of view.
Sure.
It's already hard enough, and I'll say it now. There are no real characters in this franchise except for Han that I have any care for.
Sure.
I mean, I know the sequence in Furious 7, which we'll get to at the very end, was emotional for a lot of people. I didn't care just because the characters didn't feel vibrant enough. Like, this movie is just the pinnacle of that. These characters that I do not care about, except for Han, just makes it just even worse for me. Kind of a similar situation to, for me, Good Will Hunting, where the main character is so unlikable, or just, I guess that would be the best way to say it, that it just sours the rest of the movie. But it's not just the main actor, it's everyone except for one person. So it really soured it for me, personally.
So what I think I can tell is I understand why you had not seen any of these previously, because they just don't sound like your kind of movie.
Like, I love bombastic fun, like movies like Hardcore
It doesn't
Henry.
sound like it.
But like,
just kidding.
But when they're movies that take themselves somewhat seriously, you have to provide a deeper level of something, deeper characters, deeper storylines. All those kinds of things are important to make your movie stand out. And when you don't provide deeper meanings for characters that are interesting, characters that have depth beyond "we're a family," it falls flat. Movies like Hardcore Henry are very similar, where it's just a lot of action, yet it has that added benefit of having, like, it's a first-person point of view and it's stunts we've never seen before. That's why I like that film better. Whereas this, especially as we get on later, feels like Universal trying desperately to cling on to the idea of making its own Mission Impossible style, this is going to get crazy action, but holding on to this IP that it has. So it's a weird flux. And this point, or actually I'll say after the next one, is the last point where I'll say I don't really like the films. Like, I do enjoy the later films in this franchise. I will say that right now.
Sure.
So, but let's go ahead and wrap up 3 so we can get to those movies. So number 3, I'm sure, as Adrian wants to hear my opinions first on all these. Fast and Furious 3, while it focuses on the races more than the previous 2, its completely awful lead and dialogue blunder through a script that would work better as an anime and not a Western film. And I do not mean that in an insulting way. If this was an anime, it'd be incredible. I'm just saying that right now. But I gave Fast and Furious Tokyo Drift a 36.
Nice. I think this movie's awesome. I give it a 75. Final thoughts are it's a fun movie. There's a lot of really iconic scenes and a lot of really cool racing actually from this one, and a lot of the stunts kind of took it up a notch. It's kind of the last movie we get before it really gets, or at least we start getting some really physical stunts. This is still car-based. And one of the last times we see a film that is like pretty much entirely car-based.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. But let's go ahead, move on to the 4th film in the franchise, which is Fast and Furious. Released in 2009, it was directed by Justin Lin and stars Vin Diesel, Paul Walker, and Michelle Rodriguez. Brian O'Connor, back working for the FBI in LA, teams up with Dominic Toretto to bring down a heroin importer by infiltrating his operation. So, if not for Tokyo Drift, this would easily be the worst in the franchise.
Yeah, this is my least favorite.
And that's what I've heard from a lot of Fast and Furious fans, because while there are some fun action sequences in this movie, I believe the gas tanker heist is in this one.
Yeah.
It all blends together. So like,
yeah, where it's rolling towards them, and
yeah,
Michelle Rodriguez like, Dom, and he's like, wait for it. He's got his like fist right on the wheel. He's like, just hold on. And then he just gasses it and barely makes it under the tanker.
So aside from a couple of fun action sequences like this, and I would say the final chase back across the border,
yeah,
everything else in this movie is completely forgettable.
Yeah, some of it does come back, especially in later. There's like slight tie-ins, but like mostly it's all. I mean, actually, there's some large stuff that happens. But yeah, it was very weak. This one, it's still fun. Like you got to watch it if you're gonna watch them all, but it's weaker for sure.
Yeah, I mean, from again, the major crutch of this franchise is its dialogue. And I'll talk about it a little bit later when I have my overall thoughts for the franchise, but this movie and most of the movies feel like it's a script completely written of dialogue that's supposed to be used in a trailer. Like, it's those catchphrase lines, like, we're a family, punch it, go around the corner, like, you know, those kind of, like, and that's all it feels like. And it feels, they try to make every dialogue sequence more heavy than it has to be by doing just trailer line type talk. And it doesn't work, especially for this one. But yeah, I mean, just it again, very weak, very forgettable, except for two memorable chase sequences, I would say. The opening tanker heist and the final chase back into the U.S. border. Other than that, I got nothing else to say. This movie's just pretty weak all around.
Yeah, I'd agree. I don't really have much. I think this movie's the weakest out of all of them. Still necessary in terms of plot lines. Like, I think if you skipped it, you'd be very confused at some of the plot points later on. But I still think it has its purpose. It just definitely feels like it just also got lost, kind of like the second one. It didn't know whether it wanted to be like a very serious car movie, stunt movie, or if it wanted to be like just the same lighthearted fun one as it really lost itself. So yeah, definitely the weakest for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. But let's go ahead and move through it because I got nothing more to say about this one.
Sure.
So I said, while not as bad as its predecessors, it's still not much of an improvement. It still has some fun sequences, but again, it's just so mediocre. It's so forgettable. I mean, it got a 37 from me just because, I mean, the only thing that Tokyo Drift did worse is its main actor and was just so annoying. This one at least had some more memorable sequences to me, but it was still forgettable.
Sure. Makes sense. Yeah, I gave this movie a 58. I think this movie is serviceable, but it's definitely like the most of a chore to get through, and probably on rewatches, even though I still do rewatch it, on rewatches has my interest the least. Like, even though I know all these pretty much back to back, this one I feel like I zone out the most. All the other ones I still like watch. This one I'll be like I'll go into the other room for a second. It's fine.
Yeah.
I mean, I still give it those rewatches. Like, it is still part of it, but definitely the weakest.
Yeah, absolutely. Next up, the fifth film in the franchise is Fast Five. Released in 2011, it was directed by Justin Lin and stars Vin Diesel, Paul Walker, and Dwayne Johnson. Dominic Toretto and his crew of street racers plan a massive heist to buy their freedom while in the sights of a powerful Brazilian drug lord and a dangerous federal agent. This is where the franchise got better for me. And I'm sure it got better for a lot of people.
Yeah, it becomes like the modern Fast and Furious here.
Yes, and I think what makes this movie much stronger than its predecessors is two things. Number one of the best heist sequences I've seen in film. Dragging that safe through the city streets of Rio was incredible. And actually, for once, I didn't see that switch up happen. When he opens up the safe at the end and there's no money in it, that was great. The other thing that makes this movie great is Dwayne Johnson. I think he is a great addition to this franchise. I'm sorry, Tyrese Gibson. You're wrong. He brings a heart to it, and I can actually say this now, is my favorite character in the franchise, besides Han. Because he has the most character, and yet a lot of his lines are also bad. They're not good. It's a lot of trailer talk and insults, and, I'm going to put my butt through your butt. Like, is that all you can do?
Yes.
Yes, but it's still a lot of fun. But these movies are, again, I'm going to keep echoing it, very poorly written. From a dialogue and, a point of view of, a lot of these movies felt like they had ideas for sequences, and they built things around it. Which is why the meme about Fast and Furious, which is action, 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 family, 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 action, 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 family, action, family, action, is so true. Because they fill it in with stuff that's supposed to be meaningful in between awesome action set pieces. So it's not very well written. It feels like an idea that was stretched out and filled in with moments.
Sure, I can see that.
But this movie is probably the most fun uh, after the last four. I think we're starting with this one, where I was trying to do like one movie a day over the last couple week or so, and this is the moment where I was like, okay, I want to do more than one a day because they actually were keeping my attention going forward. So,
Sure.
but what did you think? Because I feel like I've
Yeah.
talked for a while.
I definitely think this one steps it up and brings it into what we now consider Fast and Furious movies. Like I remember even seeing the trailer; it was crazy because it was such a departure from the other four, but a welcome one. I mean, I think this one definitely took it up a notch. I personally have a big complaint with the heist scene. While it's an incredible feat of stunt, they actually did that. They actually built the light poles to be taken out. I mean, they had one take. Phenomenal feat of technical theater and film and production. It just physically is impossible.
Oh yeah,
A safe that weighs that much, you could not, and it cannot hit a concrete building and not rip two cars to a dead stop. It just doesn't make any sense. And even while watching it, I was like, well, this is not possible. But I still loved the movie, and this was my first time in a movie where I went, this isn't possible, and I am having so much fun. It was like my first, like, let go of seriousness moment during my first time watching. I was like, wow, this is ridiculous. And it's so cool.
and it's funny that you're the first one to mention that none of this is possible, and because none of these movies have any sort of like real physics or anything in them, and we'll really get into that later. But like, it just but again, like that's the part about what makes them so fun is yes, they're incredibly stupid, but it's in that stupidity that you find the fun.
Yeah,
and
I think
you leave the stupid you don't like for the dialogue.
Yeah, and I think that we talk about films being art all the time, and while there's certainly painters and filmmakers that make incredibly serious and talented and artistic films, this is an art in the sense that movies, again, I personally feel we don't get there's not another franchise doing what Fast and Furious is doing, which is giving people 2.5 hours of absolutely insane action and the story doesn't matter. Like, I go to the theater to watch two cars drag a safe through a city. Like, who cares? And I don't think anyone else is bringing that. So I think the art of the Fast and Furious franchise is in its silliness. And I think that's what they start to perfect here with this movie. I think it really starts to kind of narrow in on what they were trying to do or what they wanted to do. So I think it was a huge stepping stone for sure.
Yeah, and don't get me wrong. I think that, while I'm going to continue to talk about how bad the writing and the storytelling is and how bad the dialogue are, because those are important. They're very important. For me as a storyteller and someone who likes to write characters, it's very important.
Movies still made hundreds of millions of dollars.
Yes, I'm aware, but also a lot of other films that don't deserve it either. So, but
they don't deserve it. Write that down, everybody.
Yeah, I'm just gonna say it right now. Venom is a horrible film that did not deserve $1 billion. Aquaman did not deserve $1 billion either. Anyhow, you do have to sort of put it aside for these films, but like, again, for someone like me, an outsider coming into this franchise, it is important. And I'll probably get roasted in some comments. They're like, "Oh, well, there's X movie you already reviewed that doesn't have much of a story either, and you like that one more." It depends if the movie takes itself seriously or not. And yes, these movies are bombastic, they are crazy, but they do take themselves seriously. And that does, at least from my first impression on most of these, it takes itself seriously, and that is where it loses me a lot. Because if you take yourself too seriously, but you're trying to be bombastic at the same time, it doesn't always work for me. So, I'll go ahead and get that out of the way. But let's go ahead and move on. We still got quite a few movies to talk about. So Fast 5, I said it's a fun, fast romp through the streets of Rio that provides some awesome action, and it finally brings the team together, but continues to stumble on its cheese and its bad writing. But I did end up giving Fast 5 a 65.
Oh, nice. Okay. Yeah, I gave Fast 5 a 75. I think it's certainly takes a step in the right direction in terms of what I expect now from the franchise. However, I also think it couldn't have happened without the four that came before it. But yeah, I think it's awesome. Just you could definitely tell they played into the silliness by bringing on Dwayne the Rock Johnson, because at the time Vin Diesel was one of the biggest, baddest muscle guys in film, and they were like, "Oh, well, let's have him fist fight the only other really big muscle guy in film." Like, I just think they really started to lean into that with this one, and that to me, that's when they found their identity. And I think this movie just really works. I think the vibe they were going for and the vibe they achieved lined up very closely, and I just think it's a great ride.
Absolutely. Moving on, we have the sixth film in the franchise, which is Fast and Furious 6. Released in 2013, it was directed by Justin Lin and stars Vin Diesel, Paul Walker, and Dwayne Johnson. Hobbs has Dominic and Brian assemble their crew to take down a team of mercenaries, all while Dominic deals with the reappearance of his presumed dead girlfriend. So, Fast and Furious 6, honestly, a lot of my thoughts are just repeated from Fast 5. Again, great action sequences. The appearance of the ramp car, which, let's be awesome, or let's be real here,
Is awesome.
is awesome. But I feel like, again, like it's just an echoing of the same sentiments as Fast 5. About bad writing. This one truly felt like an idea that was being stretched out. I think more so than Fast 5. At least Fast 5 had some different elements thrown in. But I mean, and Luke Evans played a menacing villain. There is that. But I do think it's just not as strong as Fast 5. And features what is quite possibly, and I didn't even know this was a joke. I knew nothing about this movie. Went in and watched it, and I was like, God damn, that's the longest runway I've ever seen. And that has
Very much a meme.
been a meme, yeah, which I didn't even know. But yeah, I mean, I think like a very unjust death for Gal Gadot's character was very annoying. Just like, oh, throw her away. Yeah, you sacrificed yourself for no reason. You could have just held one hand up to, I don't know. I think it was just trying to be her exit for the franchise, maybe.
Yeah, I think this was when she started working on Wonder Woman.
It makes sense. Fast 6 came out in 2013, so 2 years later would have been Wonder Woman.
Yes, I think she was starting,
or Batman vs Superman.
At least she was picked up for it.
Yeah.
So I think that's why she was like, well, then I gotta leave this franchise. But yeah, I think this movie also really does a great job of leaning into what it wants to be, and that not only do they have Vin Diesel fighting The Rock, now they have the two big muscly guys in Hollywood fighting a taller, musclier dude on an airplane. And I just think, again, I just have a special place for these in my heart, because I just think, to me, they know what they are at this point, and they're really just going for home runs in terms of what the fans expect. And I think they started hitting them with this one. I think it is just an insane movie. The ramp cars are awesome. I know that they actually built them for the movie. Like, they're a real vevehicle. And I
Universal
think
Studios Hollywood still, I think.
Yeah, awesome. I just think that, like, they really started to innovate specifically for the franchise and create things that were like original ideas and original things that didn't exist in any other movie. Before the sixth one, there was a lot of just like generic action sequences, still car based in a sense, but a lot of generic stuff. And this one, really, I felt they started to kind of build their own universe of stuff and of connections and people.
Yeah, I mean, and it continues on. I mean, the universe just expands. Like, it's a very like poor imitation of the Marvel Cinematic Universe, but it works, which is the weird thing. Like, all these characters like come back, so it's it's still. I'm amazed it works, actually, more than anything.
There's actually a little sneak. I don't know if you know this, but there is technically I guess what would we call it, the FFU, the Fast and Furious universe. There's another film that relates to Han's backstory. It is a Asian movie that I own. It's over there somewhere, but it's called Better Luck Tomorrow. And it stars Han, and it is actually considered canon because his name is the same and the character is the same. It's when he's a teenager.
Huh. Interesting.
So there is technically an FFU.
All right. Well, good to know. But I got nothing else to say really about 6. I mean, a lot of dumb, loud, fun action.
Yeah. Okay.
So I mean, yeah, another fun romp that adds action but less story, an idea stretched into a movie, and continues the franchise staple of bad writing, dialogue, and motivations. Again, I don't think it's as strong as Fast 5, so I gave it a 59.
Nice. Okay. I think this one definitely took it up a notch in terms of what Fast and Furious is with the airplane and kind of just ramping everything up. So I give this movie a 78. I think it starts to get into what I really enjoy about the movies. So I think they ramp up from here for me. No pun intended that this was the introduction of the ramp car. But yeah, so I definitely think I really enjoy it. I think this is where, if you don't really want to watch the whole thing, starting at 5 and kind of jumping into these movies is where you're going to have the iconic Fast and Furious experience while watching it. You'll kind of understand what everyone has been talking about, and you'll kind of get some of the ridiculousness of it.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. That's the fun part of these movies, is how ridiculous they are. So, but let's go ahead and move it on. 7th film in the franchise is Furious 7. Released in 2015, it was directed by James Wan, interestingly, and stars Vin Diesel, Paul Walker, and Dwayne Johnson. Deckard Shaw seeks revenge against Dominic Toretto and his family for his comatose brother. This is the notable film in the franchise because it is obviously Paul Walker's last film, where I believe half of his footage is either his brother or digitally enhanced.
It's the first. Well, yeah, it was one of the first times we saw, like, it was his brother body and like actually acting it, but then they actually digitally imposed.
Yeah, which I mean, there is some emotional weight to what happens at the end of this movie, knowing what happened to the real life actor, and it's kind of weird in the movie because they the way they talk about it at the end is like, oh, we're never going to see him again. He's just going to ride off into the sunset. Which in universe, he's still alive. I'm assuming. So like, it's weird that they're talking about him like that, and it's almost like a funeral, kind of when they're sitting on the beach. Like, man, things are going to be different. And it's like, I mean, technically, in all logic, you could call him up, right? I mean, they talk about that in Furious 8. They're like, why don't we call up Brian? He's like, oh no, he's with, he's doing his thing, So it feels weird.
I think it would have been weird had they killed off the character.
Well, yeah, obviously because he died in real life, that would be very insensitive. But I do want to highlight the awesome bus rescue sequence in this movie. Which was a lot of fun. Like, it thoroughly kept my attention that entire time.
Yeah, super fun.
And Paul Walker doing a lot on the bus, actually, in fighting. And I don't know if that was actually him before he passed, or if it was his brother. Or
I don't know. I think his brother was... don't quote me on this, but I think his brother was his stunt double previously.
Okay.
Like, I think that was the connection. So they were like, we already know you, and you're on set. So let's just have you stand in for him.
Yeah. I'd be very interested to see when the actual shots that aren't him are in it.
It's all over. Yeah, but it's all over the movie. Like, they didn't film it in any order. So, literally some of the scenes...
Films don't film from start to finish. Like, they...
Yeah, but literally, like, I think literally the opening scene is not him. And, yeah, it's weird which scenes are. And, of course, like, sometimes it splits halfway through a scene. Because they had recorded, like, half of it or filmed it, and then he passed, so then they had to splice in his brother.
Yeah, I do.
But you can't really tell.
It is very hard, and I will say, because it's just enhancements, because his brother looks like him, just you have to change it visually. It's not like a whole head replacement or something. So it does work. I would say it looks a little goofy on the last part when they're gearing up to race. It looks a little weird, but I mean that's no fault of their own. I mean, the emotion of that moment is much more apparent to you than how goofy Paul Walker looks. But I will also say this movie has a very... I remember I was watching this and a friend of mine who was in the same room was like, what just happened? And it was the moment when Dominic, or Dom, I'll say Dom, gets dragged into Mr. Nobody's, like, lair thing, right? And Mr. Nobody's just like, you want a Belgian ale? And he's like, nah, I'm more of a Corona man. And he pulls out the bucket of Corona. That happens to be labeled on the front. This is like the bucket from the beach. Like, Kurt Russell went to a beach, shot the couple, and took the bucket back to his little hideout, and brings it up, displayed and all, in the most apparent use of, like, free advertising, or, like, you know, advertising in a film I've ever seen, which feels very weird that that Corona is a part of this movie when it's a driving movie, and they're doing alcohol in a driving movie.
Oh, I'll tell you, every time I drink a Corona, I feel like I'm Vin Diesel. So I could care less. Yeah, no, I'm literally...
more drinking and driving is the problem. But, I mean, again...
Well, I don't think he has more than... maybe... I don't think he even finishes that beer before they show him driving.
He's just like, all right, let's go.
I'm more of a man that smells a Corona. That's
it's like bottled in 2013.
Are there ages? I don't know.
They're just mass produced. He's like, assembly line 6. But I mean, like, it's weird because James Wan directed this movie, and we have talked a lot about James Wan because of the Conjuring franchise, also the director of the original Saw film, and Aquaman, a very, very talented director. Even he can't elevate this movie for me past this just action-y, schlocky, you know, fun time. And it's just kind of weird. And I actually was listening to someone talk about the franchise, and they actually said that they preferred the way that Justin Lin directed the Fast and Furious movies as opposed to the way that James Wan did, which I think is very interesting, because usually we talk about how James Wan is just incredible, and this movie didn't feel like him.
Yeah, I would say it didn't feel like him, but yeah, I would agree it didn't feel like him. But I did want to point out that this movie definitely holds like probably one of the most special places, because having seen these movies in theaters from the time that the first one came out, like being taken and going to midnight premieres and stuff, I remember exactly where I was when I found out that Paul Walker had passed away. Like, that is one of the largest passings for me or one of the first and largest that I experienced. So I think the treatment at the end was perfect for him exiting. I think I agree it would have been insensitive for them to kill him in a car accident in the movie. But I think the beach scene and then just the final race that they have, where no one really wins, because everyone was like, we're going to find out who finally wins. They're going to have him win or Dom win, and they just kind of leave it open-ended as his life was. So I think that's a really phenomenal sequence there, and I think there's not really any better way you could have done it. I'd be interested to see what was on the writer's table, because obviously they had to come up with it kind of on the fly.
Oh, yeah.
So I'd be super interested to see what other alternatives there were, because I think it fit really well. And just a side note, I did get to go to the midnight premiere in California of this movie, and they had the cars from the movie in the lobby of the theater.
Ooh,
it was nice. Very, very cool.
But yeah, I mean, I feel like, again, I feel like I'm echoing a lot of the statements throughout these movies, that they're a lot of fun, but just the writing isn't good. I mean, this one has a little bit more of emotional quality to it because of Paul Walker, but that's the one that makes it stand out, unfortunately. I think it kind of pushes this one to more of like a more noteworthy point. But
I think there's a lot of fun on foot sequences in this one that we didn't really get in previous films, like through the streets, and some characters coming back, which is nice. And I think it starts to kind of loop in that FFU that we've been talking about, where you're like, oh my gosh, there they are. So I think this one really, again, from here on out, they hone in what they want it to be. So I really like this movie. But particularly, I will agree with you. I think I really like this because of what happened. And the way that they treated the role and the character and everything, I think was very tasteful and well done. So yeah, I enjoy it.
All right. I mean, I'm not even gonna really give it a final thought, because it's just the same final thoughts every time. Like, it's just, bad writing, bad storytelling, but good action. And this one actually has some decent directing, I would say. I think James Wan does as much as he can with it. And obviously, when you have to change your production halfway through, just when a cast member has passed, is no easy feat. I mean, the fact that you're even able to finish this film is a feat in and of itself. But overall, I think, again, it just falls right in the middle of the later films. So I gave it a 62.
Okay. I do think that this movie is elevated because of what had happened. So I give this movie an 82. I think it definitely is climbing the ladder. I think that the emotional weight that this movie carries is prevalent. And I think it gives the movie a tone. If I had to be extremely critical, it gives it like a tone that I think fits the story well. I think all of it kind of came together, as much of it that was on the fly and impromptu and last minute. I think James Wan was really able to create something coherent that actually kind of follows the storyline and you can understand it and you feel for it. I certainly did. I know if you're just like binge watching it and you weren't a fan of Paul Walker, it's probably a little awkward, the send off at the end and the fact that he's still in the universe and all that. But for the dedicated fans and the people that kind of grew up with Paul Walker, influencing their lives and their love of cars and stuff, it definitely feels nice to know that he lives on through something else, and that he's still talked about. And I mean, he did make an impact, so I like that he's there.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm not saying I don't like that he's there.
I didn't say he did.
No, yeah, I just, yeah. Anyhow, yeah, let's finish the last of the Fast and Furious movies before we get to the spin-off, which is Fate of the Furious. Released in 2017, it was directed by F. Gary Gray and stars Vin Diesel, Jason Statham, and Dwayne Johnson. When a mysterious woman seduces Dominic Toretto into the world of terrorism and a betrayal of those closest to him, the crew face trials that will test them as never before. This film has some great set pieces. The submarine chase at the end is a lot of fun. The car cascade in New York is also a lot of fun.
Magnets.
That's the ninth one, isn't it? With the magnets in the car, and they attract it to the side and they shoot it off.
That's the eighth. The ninth one's not out yet.
Yeah, but it was in the trailer where they have the car with the magnets on the side, and they. That's not what you're talking about, is it?
Doesn't this have the robotic cars?
The robotic cars, but they're not magnets.
Yeah. That's how they pull. Oh, I guess you're right. I'm thinking that they got pulled out of the
no, they drove out of it.
They drove out. They turned on. Yeah.
But again, this movie's all right. Like the bad writing, and Charlize Theron does what she can, but even like I love Charlize Theron. I think she's a great actress. Even she's mediocre in this movie. Helen Mirren was actually a really fun inclusion, but. I don't think I have any specific notes for Fast 8 here.
Oh, go ahead.
I was saying it's more of the same. I mean, like, and when I say it's more of the same, please don't take that as necessarily a bad thing. I mean, every movie goes up with the action and with the stakes and all that. So that's not what I'm going on. When I say it's a lot of the same, it's just a lot of the same comments that I have about it. And I don't want to sound like a broken record player and say bad writing, bad characters, bad dialogue, whatever. It's still more fun, like as the films go on.
Sure. I think one of my favorite parts of this movie is in the initial race sequence. Vin Diesel has something that he calls a poor man's turbo, which he makes with literally like a Pepsi tab cap, and just a poor man's turbo is just blowing up the car. like it literally just pulls the fuel line. And then he's reversing while the car's on fire faster than the cars that are fine going forward. And I think it is just an amazing scene to start the film off. But then I think there's a lot of fun stuff in this movie. Like, yeah, the robot cars and the harpoons and all that I think is super fun. And then obviously the like missile that's on the ice and he reaches out and like just kicks the nuke and he's like, let me just redirect this. I just think that whole scene is super fun. I think kind of the whole like betrayal storyline was super interesting, with all of it being like, it kind of starts, but it's like family is everything, and then it's like, but he's got to betray everyone. I think that's super cool, and then the like comeback at the end is really, really nice. Yeah, I think the stunts in this really, really, really found their home with this movie. I feel like this movie just felt like it knew 100% what it was. Fast and Furious as a franchise had found where it wanted to be, and just went with it. Just totally ran with it, and I loved it. I think it's super fun.
Gotcha. Yeah, and I mean, I do think that by this point is the franchise has lost what made it its heart, which was the racing component, right? Like that's what these
Oh,
films started as, and I don't want to say that this series shouldn't go as far as it have, because I mean it's obviously doing a lot to further itself, but like I feel like it's kind of lost its heart of the racing element of it. And I think
yeah.
that if more of the action sequences were probably tied to like popular race events, it would be like more memorable. Like imagine a heist during the Monaco Grand Prix
Or during the Indianapolis
or
500.
something. Yeah, like tie it back to cars. Like that's what a lot of your initial fan base got into it for. And but I mean, like, granted, you still have a very large fan base, and it's because of this over the top action, crazy set pieces. But you know, I feel like it does. It has lost a little bit of its heart. Not that the heart was very good in the first place, but it didn't maintain that. If that makes sense. I mean, every film you get like a sequence. There's like a street race sequence in every movie, whether it's the Cuban Mile in the eighth one or Seven had the what was the one in the seventh one? I think it was like the Abu Dhabi stuff.
Yeah, they had that when they were racing to the actual hotel. They all had their sports cars. And then the fifth one, I believe they raced the cop cars
Yes, yeah.
from red light to red light.
But I feel
The
like most of these
sixth,
movies now, like the only car stuff you get is like, oh, here's Mr. Nobody's new base, and it's full of drug dealer cars. Oh, that's great. There's a Lamborghini. There's a tank. Whatever. I mean, you see those ones later in the movie, but it's like they're not being used for a specific purpose. It's like, okay, we're going to frost-covered Russia. You know, like, okay, that tank is probably a good idea, and we'll bring the Lamborghini.
of
Like,
course.
it's, I mean, that's the answer. Yeah, of course, why not? Just do it.
Yeah.
But then, like, you have to set aside the logic a little bit and be like, okay, sure, let's see what happens. But those cars were controlling way too good out there for
Oh,
any car on
yeah.
ice.
No, especially without chains or anything. I mean, it was just crazy.
Ridiculous, yeah.
But I think what's something that I find really difficult is that these movies are hard for me to be critical of because everybody knows what's wrong with them. I think the fun part for me is those giant set pieces and just the fact that the movie, like, I know exactly what I'm gonna get for my money when I go into the theater. I'm not expecting like a plot twist that I can't see coming. I'm sure they spoiled it in the trailer. Like, it's just, I know exactly what I'm getting, and I have to give the franchise respect for that. They just are giving the fans exactly what they expect when they purchase a ticket, and I think that's admirable.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, you have an expectation from fans, and you're meeting it, and
Yeah.
that's the important part.
Yeah.
Well, let's go ahead and wrap this one up before we get to Hobbs and Shaw. Very same sentiment. Another fun yet mindless action movie, meandering its fantastic action through a script of nothing but trailer talk. So with Fate of the Furious, I gave it a 60.
Nice. Okay. I give this movie an 80. I think 7 still holds a higher place in my mind just because of the events and how much emotion was around going to see it. I lived in San Diego at the time, and I drove all the way back up, all the way up California to go see it at midnight with a buddy. I mean, it was just a huge deal for me. So that one still holds a little bit higher. This one, I think, while it still keeps a lot of the same kind of tone, theme, vibe, all of that, I think that emotional component isn't there. So while this one is 100% fun, it just doesn't have that weight that the seventh one had. So it's just a notch under. Nothing crazy. They're still both really good.
Gotcha. Well, let's go ahead. Let's close this one out, Adrian. We're going with the ninth film in the franchise at the moment, which is Fast and Furious Presents Hobbs and Shaw. Released in 2019, it was directed by David Leitch and stars Dwayne Johnson, Jason Statham, and Idris Elba. Luke Hobbs and Deckard Shaw form an unlikely alliance when a cybergenetically enhanced villain threatens the future of humanity. I am going to be blunt. I'm just going to be honest. This is the best movie in the franchise. And
Oh, wow. Really?
I say that specifically because the chemistry between Dwayne Johnson and Jason Statham is awesome. Like,
Well, that's why they got the offshoot. I mean, their whole
yeah,
dynamic.
like, yes, a lot of their talk is just insults, but the insults are great. Like, this movie is just so much more fun because you can tell that they're having fun. And, like, not just in the action sequences. You can tell that they're having fun when they're just talking. You can tell, like, they had input in what their characters were doing. Their characters were actually interesting, at least to me. I liked the idea of a villain. And yes, this movie is the most bonkers out of all of them with its story. This death cult that wants to turn everyone into robots, and Idris Elba's a cyborg, and there's it's none of it is scientifically possible. And I think this movie specifically hit all the chords for me that the other films hit for you. Where this is the one where I finally sat down and I had a smile on my face for most of this movie.
Nice. That's awesome.
Whereas the other ones, like when it was the action sequences, I was like, all right, and then just every dialogue sequence, I was just nothing they said mattered, because it was just the same dialogue every time. Family means everything. We do this for family. Well, you do it for pride, and that kind of stuff. This one actually felt just, while it's nothing new, and I will say that this movie is not perfect. It's not even really, in the grand scheme of things, a great film. It's the best in terms of its action, its characters, its dialogue for me personally, and that's what elevated it to the best in the franchise for me.
Sure. Yeah, I think this movie is definitely up there. I would say top 3 for sure. I think the characters deserved this movie. Yes. Particularly one thing that I think is this is probably the second stunt that I was in the trailer. I was like, this is so dumb. Is when Dwayne The Rock Johnson's family, Hobbs, they go with clubs and native weapons against people with actual guns. And they're like, we're gonna do it our style. And it's like, what, die? That doesn't make any sense. But it was a fun scene. I mean, and they make it kind of make sense. But yeah, I definitely totally see why this happened. I think these definitely became probably the 2 most interesting characters throughout the later films. So yeah, I love it. Top 3 for sure. There's not really much else to say. This movie definitely builds on, I would say, Jason Statham's character more than it does Hobbs, or Shaw's character more than it does Hobbs. But I hope we get more for Hobbs. I mean, both of them have kind of surpassed every other character since Paul Walker's leaving of the franchise. Aside from Han, I would say everyone is very interested to see Han come back and see what happens.
Yeah, I'm also very interested to have Hobbs and Shaw come back.
Yeah.
I think they just announced today that it's very possible they'll return for F10, which I believe is supposed to be the last film, as far as we know. But yeah, this movie is just a lot of bonkers action, a lot of bonkers fun, but it actually has a story that it's telling from beginning to end, which is a big plus for me. It's not the best story, but it has one, and that's major points that it earns from me. Also, the character's dialogue is very good. I thought Vanessa Kirby was also very... what's the word I'm thinking of? She was an addition to the franchise that I liked. I think she was a very positive addition. You could tell that... You felt that they had a history. That Jason Statham and Vanessa Kirby had a history as brother and sister. You could feel that. I will say one of the big things of this movie that I didn't like is a lot of the cameos that are just made for joke's sake. Let's put Ryan Reynolds in. Who's he going to play? Ryan Reynolds. Okay, yeah, but who's he going to play? No, he's playing Ryan Reynolds, but as a CIA agent. Yeah. And then Kevin Hart, out of nowhere. I didn't know he was in the movie. So he turned around and just sat there, and I was like, oh, you. Granted, his dialogue moment was actually really funny. And he's like, oh, you're a spy? You're a lawman? Yeah, I sit in a can of farts all day. And I was like, all right, you're actually getting some points from me here, Kevin. Which I usually don't like him, and I actually thought he was good in this one.
Oh, wow. That's interesting. I think one of the things this movie does really well too is they really play on the dichotomy of like brute force methodology and super spy tactics. And they do a lot of it. They split them up, Hobbs and Shaw, and they literally show you side by side how the different tactics work and don't work.
Yeah.
And I think that's something that was kind of like the essence of their relationship in the previous one, and they really just focused on it, and I think it worked. So yeah, I really like this movie. I don't think there's a ton to say about this one, but I think it's super fun. It's got some cool action sequences with Idris Elba and like the motorcycle and a couple cool car stuff.
Idris Elba plays a great villain.
Yeah.
Saying. I mean, I want him more as James Bond than I want him as a villain, but it definitely works. But let's go ahead and wrap this up. Talk about the franchise a little bit. We'll go over our favorite movies and which ones are not our favorites. But I said this one is easily the most fun and bonkers yet because it knows what it's trying to be. The two leads have great chemistry, and while it can't really get over its jokes and cameos and some bad dialogue, it does stand head and shoulders above the others for me. I gave Hobbs and Shaw a 75.
Oh wow, big increase.
Yes.
I give this movie an 80. I think it's also just right up there with kind of the whole like the pick that or at least like top 3 cream of the crop, if you had to say. So I definitely put it right there, right in between. I think this movie really is also kind of like the 8th one, where it's just Fast and Furious through and through. They kind of threw all the seriousness to the wind. And they were like, you know what? You want bigger action? You want people falling from 12-story buildings and being fine? Fine, we'll give it to you. I think it really, really works.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, so Fast and Furious. We've gone through the whole thing. I have watched 9 films that I have never seen before. That is a record, I think, for me in the span of a week's time. I do want to get some final thoughts over the entire franchise, and I do feel like I have been unjustly negative towards a lot of these films, and I do think that is coming from a place of now, because of this show, because of this podcast, looking at it through more critical eyes. And I know that if I saw these as a kid, even as a younger teen, probably about the age that you had discovered these and saw them in theaters, I would probably have much better reactions to these movies.
Why do you think that's gone away?
I don't think it hasn't, because I still love movies that are action-packed for no reason. I mean, for instance, I loved King Arthur: Legend of the Sword more than you did, and that
well, no,
really
I guess
story.
Why do you think you would have loved these in the past more than you do now?
Because these films, I think, are, while they're not specifically written well, they're not acted well, whatever you want to say, they are made, and I do think they are made for the kid in all of us. Because this is kind of like what you imagine playing cops and robbers with your friends, or like, you know, you have your little Hot Wheels and you're jumping them off ramps in your home. Like, this is the kind of stuff you think of as a kid. And I honestly think that, I mean, you know, if they ever make a Hot Wheels movie, the Fast and Furious, like, mindset would be great for it, you know. But I think that's where it is, and I think it's a lot of the same reason. Like, you and I both saw Star Wars as a kid, right? We grew up on Star Wars, but then you talk to people who haven't seen any Star Wars and they're our age, and then they watch them and they're like, it's okay. That's the same exact thing that I'm going through right now, because like I didn't see these when I was younger. I would have enjoyed them more, and not because I've lost a sense of fun or anything, but that's the audience that it's really made for. So.
Sure.
I mean, the young at heart. I mean, not that I've lost my young at heart, but, you know.
Some contradictory statements.
I guess. I make them all the time. I know that. Please don't roast me in the comments. But, I mean, yeah, I mean, these movies are super fun. I will say the only one, which would be the only ones would be 3 and 4, were the only ones that lost my attention throughout them.
And I'm with you there on 4. I'm with you there on 4, for sure.
But, like, my attention was held through all of them. Even the bad ones, I would say, actually, now. Like, I watched them all without turning them off, like, or looking away. I just sat there engaged for the whole time. And luckily, most of them are pretty short. The last few do get a little too long at 2 hours and 10 minutes, which I didn't really talk about in any of the reviews. But one of my biggest things, or a couple things I wanted to talk about with the franchise, number one, this is definitely a guilty pleasure series. And I completely understand that now, because I will say a lot of these will probably end up being guilty pleasures for me. Especially Fast 5 on. it's all dialogue that's meant to be in a trailer, and it's not really anything meaningful. But there's also part of me that understands it's not supposed to be anything else, right? It's
Yeah,
not
I think
supposed
literally all the dialogue is meant to be one-liners that you can quote to your friends.
Yeah, like the fact that you said, like, and I'm not trying to continue this joke, but like your stuff with the Cuban Mile, how I've been talking about it for forever, and then watching that movie and realizing that it's literally a microscopic part of this franchise.
It's literally half a sentence.
Yeah, I was like, what the heck, like,
Like all the stuff, like we're all talking about how family is just like hounded home, but like how many people in the world quote like, "You never leave family behind, even when they do." Like it's just all like one-liner quips.
Yeah, but it would help if they were well written and they were good, but they're just like, it's ham-fisted, right? It's like, family, like you're shoving it down a kid's throat, like, family.
I love it. I'm hungry. Yeah, give me more.
I will say there are two things I want to highlight before we kind of finish this out. Number one, I did not know this, and apparently if there's any car experts out there, please let me know. Apparently, according to these films, cars have approximately 178 gears that they can shift into, and every single one of them makes a car go faster.
Absolutely.
Which I didn't know. I mean, after 6 gear changes, I feel like you couldn't really go any faster, but all of a sudden Vin Diesel's just like, and it keeps going, which is insane.
Yeah. And nitrous in this franchise also hurts the integrity of the chassis somehow, which isn't logical, but I totally get your gear thing. Like, I think we were talking about it earlier, that even when they're parked, Vin Diesel is shifting. Like, he's not going anymore.
He's like, no, we're not. But the one
He's
thing
like,
I will say,
you started in 6th gear? I'm in 12th already.
the last thing I want to say is that, and I do not mean this in any way as an insult towards what I'm referencing, Fast and Furious would be one of the best animes ever made, because it's just crazy bonkers action, bad dialogue, and if they just worked on the characters a little bit, this would be an incredible anime.
I see what you're saying, but I think that the action sequences would be less impressive because you can do whatever you want in anime.
Yeah.
So I think
with CGI though, they can do whatever they want to. So it's like.
But I will argue that I think it's different seeing a realistic looking Lamborghini drive on ice than it would be to see one in anime. It's more like shocking.
True.
But I could see the fun aspect, like the story. I would love to see like even just a spin-off or like a canon sub story, like a Rogue One. I would love to see a Fast and Furious story done in anime. I think they could do some crazy stuff.
I would love to see it. I mean, we're getting an anime Lord of the Rings film, which I'm totally down for. We're also getting an anime Star Wars series. Like, please do a Fast and Furious anime. I really want to see it. But that being said, that's going to bring us to an end of this franchise fever. Adrian, what's your favorite film in the franchise?
My favorite film...
Maybe not the best film, but what's your favorite?
Yeah, I know. My favorite film would probably be the 5th one.
With the Rio chase?
Yeah. I just think that one really had all the characters. They'd been in the franchise long enough. They were all kind of firing on all cylinders for the first time. No pun intended. So I think that was really where I could feel the family. And I think that would probably be my favorite just for that reason of the shift in style.
Gotcha. For me, it's a tie between Hobbs and Shaw and Too Fast, Too Furious, actually. I think...
Nice. It's a good span.
Purely for the reason because Too Fast, Too Furious feels like, Miami Vice. It feels like something completely different, and I'm always okay with something completely different, even if it's not the best thing. But what would you say is, we already kind of answered this, but worst film in the franchise, Fast and Furious, fourth one?
For sure.
For me, I would say it's Tokyo Drift, purely because of Sean Boswell, the main character. But also, I agree, the fourth one is definitely the worst. Both of them, I would say, personally. But that's going to bring us to an end. Adrian, I'm sure we have a lot of people out there who are wondering how they can learn about new episodes or maybe follow us. Where can they do that?
Yeah, if you're listening to this, you found us. But if you want to go ahead and interact with us, which we love to do, we are on pretty much every social media as the Drive Back Podcast. You can find us on Instagram. We have a TikTok now, which we're going to start ramping up. On Instagram, we post short reviews, kind of little quips. If you're wondering if a movie just came out, no spoilers. We just give you kind of a quick highlight of what we thought of that movie. And then we also kind of interact. We post every time we update. And then if you're watching this here on YouTube, this is where you can go ahead and subscribe and click that bell, because we do have exclusive videos here on YouTube. And here we post one video. If a movie just came out, we'll post one with no spoilers, so you can go ahead and see if it's something you're interested in. And then we'll go ahead and post another one a day later or so that is spoiler-filled, so you can come back, watch with us, and hear us talk about it, and see if you agree or not, and then go ahead and let us know.
Absolutely, yeah. So please follow us there. That way we can interact with you and let you know when things are coming. Be on the lookout. This is coming out the same week that F9 is going to be releasing, so I'm pretty sure Adrian and I plan on seeing this probably the day it comes out.
I will be at the midnight premiere, yes.
I don't know if they're doing a midnight premiere in my area, but I will double check. If they do, we should definitely record right after.
Sure.
Immediate impressions. We'll try and have that up early in the weekend, so you guys can have a full span of the Fast and Furious franchise from us. But as I
what
said,
more could you ask for?
Right? How about good writing? I'm just going to keep being harsh on the writing. Anyhow, thanks for watching, thanks for listening, and be on the tune for next week with another new episode type. We love you guys so much. Thank you for watching. Thank you for listening to this episode of The Drive Back. Make sure to be on the lookout for new episodes every Monday, and make sure to follow us on social media.